And our guest today is Professor Avis Beek from the Faculty of Education here on the Waterloo campus. Welcome, Avis.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm glad to be here.
Can you tell us a bit about your background? How did you come to find yourself working at Laurier here?
Well, it's a bit of a twisty story. Maybe I'll give the Coles Notes shortened version. I'm from Ottawa originally, and I trained as a biologist at McGill. And then I was trained as a teacher at UBC in Vancouver. My professional identity is definitely that of being a teacher. That's how I look at myself. My first teaching job was quite interesting. I worked in the Canadian Arctic in a small Inuit village called Aviss, which is on the west coast of the Hudson Bay. And I did that for 5 years, and I loved it. I found that the experience of working across culture and language was really interesting. I felt like it was a really transformative time for me, and it just got me kind of interested in this idea of working across cultures or working interculturally. I know that I like that diversity. I like that experience. I'm curious, and I like to investigate people and environments. My Czech friend here, she calls me just very, very nosy. But I know from that time being up north, I really wanted to walk the earth a little bit. So I did a small development job it was a volunteer role in Malawi. So I went from the Arctic to Malawi in Africa, working to help with professional development programs for teachers in Malawi. And then I took my first job as an international school teacher in Bahrain. And that's where I started working in math and science. I started working with the International Baccalaureate program. I picked up a husband in Bahrain. He's from English. And then we together went to Malaysia, to the north of the country near the Thai border. And we worked in a city called Penang at the International School of Penang. And again, math, science, and International Baccalaureate. Our two daughters were born there. And whenever I tell my story professionally, it always ties into my personal story. But my older daughter's in her second year at Queen's now. My younger daughter's in grade 12. She's an IB student herself. And then we made our way to Japan, where we were for 6 years. And then most recently, we were based here, where I am today, in Prague in the Czech Republic. So all those sort of weird, strange little places have taken me on some pretty interesting adventures. One thing that's happened to me quite recently that I'm really excited about is I've done some work with a small grassroots NGO in the Netherlands that works with refugee children in accommodation centers in Greece. So aside from the work I've done with very privileged international schools, I've been also able to do some really interesting work with these refugee families. When this role came up in February of 2020, which was an interesting time, we hadn't heard of the pandemic quite yet, and felt like I hit the jackpot because it combined my interests in international education, specifically in international schooling. I could use my connections and networks I've built, but it also, I think, gave me a chance to explore what my bread and butter had been for many years, and that was teaching math and science. So I was very lucky, and it just worked out. So I started in July of 2020. I'm fairly new to academia. I have done, my doctoral study, but just in a very different context. So it's been an adventure. It's been very exciting and, like I said, twisty.
Well, it's a pretty fascinating background. I'm sure we could talk about all of your adventures overseas for the entire half hour. Out of all those places that you've lived and worked, what's your favorite? Is that a fair question?
Nope, it's a very
Not a
unfair
fair
question.
question.
No. That said, I am returning. Even though I'm here now, I am returning to Canada. My husband, who's English, like I said, we are going to be making a home in Canada. And Canada's changed a lot in the 25 years I've been away. So I've always had that draw. So I am excited to become part of the Canadian experience again. So right now my heart is being pulled in that direction. I will get there. I will get there soon.
I have to say I've spent a similar amount of time away from my home country of the US, and I have no interest in going back.
Oh, I'm so
Unfortunately,
sorry.
I've made a home here in Canada, and thank you for having me. Maybe we could move on a little bit, Avis, as you think about ramping up your research program here at Laurier, or virtually anywhere in the world, but your program as a faculty member here in at Laurier. How would you describe the research that you're aiming to do? Like, what are like? Is there like a big? Is there a label? Can you pigeonhole it somehow? Is it?
Mm. It is hard. I'm very interested in international education, but that's a massive field, and there's not an easy Wikipedia page to define what it is. International education, I think, in the university setting, is a lot to do with bringing international students in. I think it can be quite lucrative to do that. So there's a lot of interest in post-secondary education in Canada. It's also about Canadians studying away. It's about faculty being able to, engage with researchers around the world. I do think my interests are a little bit different. I'm more interested in the K to 12 experience. I'm more interested in teacher training. So the kinds of things that I'm excited about are building interculturalism into our program. When I came to Laurier, I should have said that to start. I work a lot with the International Education Studies program, which is a new program that will have our first graduates in 2023. And it's a combination between foundation courses in education, but also some wonderful courses they take through global studies. So I am interested in all things international that relate to that K to 12. But increasingly, I have interests as well in marginalized groups, and the work I've done with the refugee organization, different things I've done that relate to my STEM background to promote STEM with girls and women. And if we can stretch that into global context, that's a lot of what I'd like to do. International education can encompass so many things. An area I'm just learning a lot about in the last year has to do with indigenization, but on a global scale, and the experience in Canada and its parallels in terms of providing quality education for Indigenous people in many countries around the world. I think that we really are part of a global community as educators, and whatever I can do to sort of tap into that. I am interested in terms of our program. I've been doing a little bit of research with our students because they are really special students. They are wonderful, and they're engaged and excited, and I feel proud of them, and I'm inspired by them. And I've done some work to learn about their experience in our program. And there's a strange disconnect that's come out of the data I've collected so far, that they said the kind of person that should take our program should be really open to this intercultural learning. That was a really high, a lot of them identified that as a priority of people who would take the program. But very few, I think of the maybe 80 or 90 respondents, I think only one actually said that's why they took the program themselves. There's this weird disconnect. And I think what it boils down to is that they weren't entirely clear on the conceptual framework of what we're doing in our program. So that I did some writing this summer, and I'm working on a chapter that's in revision stage now about building a conceptual framework that's accessible not only to our instructors, but to our students, so they can really recognize the value of intercultural competencies or interculturalism, whatever we want to call it. So that's an angle I'm really exploring, and I think there's a lot of work to do.
That's great, Avis. I want to go back to something you said earlier in the answer there. Your interest in working with marginalized groups, particularly women in science and math. I don't know if you're aware, given that you're relatively new to Laurier, but we have a Center for Women in Science. And if you've not made a connection with that, I'd be happy to help you do that.
Thank you for that. And I have connected with them because I got hooked up with a project. Maria Candellini Williams, our dean, is she's on things, and she had an idea not long ago to apply for a promo science NSERC grant. And that was a great experience. It was short. We did it. It was very intense, 1 month, but it was Maria and then three colleagues from our faculty, Julie Mueller and Jennifer Straub and Jennifer Holm. And the project meant I had to do a lot of networking on our campus. So I connected with Office of Indigenous Initiatives and the EDI and this wonderful center, because our intention with this project is to have an event, but also a series of training opportunities for our students that really draws in groups who are not well represented in STEM.
Right.
And I think particularly in the Waterloo region where we're so STEM heavy, I think it's a really interesting proposal. We'll see what happens. I think we're still very committed to doing the work if the proposal doesn't come through. But through that, I was able to meet up with the Women in Science, which was a great connection for sure.
That's great. And I mean, there are many problems with bringing marginalized people into academia, but the pipeline is one of them. And so starting in school is essential to make sure that there's even a fighting chance later on. So thank you for that work. Thinking about your past research, I guess, what would you say was one of your prouder moments as a researcher?
I know that right now, I have to say, right now we're working in our faculty. There's a really strong commitment that I feel really proud of to really embed the ideals of EDI and indigenization into everything we do. And I like being part of that. So there's an EDI coalition that one of my colleagues, Arta van Izadorad, had started, and I was involved. I think mostly I was involved because I wanted to listen, I wanted to learn. So through that, we had, and I was mentioning this before we started, we had 2 BEd students who wanted to do it's just a short alternative placement that's required each year in May, usually in May, which was meant to be a 3-week project where we would gather resources suitable for teachers that allow them to grow personally in terms of their understanding of EDI and indigenization, but also classroom resources they could use to further their practice. So my 2 students, Reni Taliancic, I'm dropping so many names today, and Calista Mejia Torres, they've been fabulous. And I've been really proud of them because they've embraced the work. And like I was saying before we started, it's challenging because a big part of what we do is we want to vet the resources to make sure they're appropriate, make sure that they're useful, that they respect the groups that maybe they're describing or that they represent. And they've been dogged. They've been really wonderful. And it's been nice to see them grow. All of us have learned a lot about how we would curate a resource like this, how we would share it. It's important that we bring in experts. And we did draw on a lot of really great resources at Laurier, different people that were really helpful in bringing this together. But it was a research project, maybe a bit more of a gray research project. And I think just seeing my 2 students and how committed they are to not only the task at hand, but the work in general, it's been a really great experience for me.
That's a nice segue to sort of ask you a bit about how you, one of the goals I'm trying to get at in this series is to give people a bit of an understanding of the variety in the ways in which people approach research and how people do research in different fields. And so one of the kind of standard questions I often ask is around collaboration, and whether is your work largely collaborative? Is it largely just a solo effort? How do you work with graduate students? Can you give us some sense of how you work as a researcher?
It's been tough in a lot of ways because of COVID. Even though I'm not in Canada right now, I have been to Waterloo and I have been to Laurier once. It's very nice. But that distance, especially as I kind of think of myself, I'm a 25-year-old trapped in a 50-year-old's body because I'm an emerging scholar. I'm new I've been for many years working in schools, and when I did my doctoral study, I did it remotely and, in person. It was a little bit of a challenge. So here I am, ready to go, sleeves pulled up, and we're stuck in this remote environment. That said, the Faculty of Education, they're a fabulous bunch, and everyone has been really generous and supportive. I think because we don't have a coffee pot that we all stand around, it's not as spontaneous, some of those connections. The NSERC grant experience, it was a very intense month that we took to get that together, and I loved it. I loved the intensity, and then it kind of stopped, and it felt like there was a gap. So I know that when we are able to come together again, within our faculty, I think there's going to be some really interesting projects that can emerge. That said, the kinds of connections that I've been making are really interesting because I have to be careful with my time zones all the time, because some weeks I'll meet with someone who's from UNICEF, or I'll meet with a scholar at a university in Greece, or I'll be speaking to someone at a meeting not long ago with someone in Australia about their work. So being online is in another perspective has opened up research. It's become much more normal to be working like this and spreading around. I don't want to suggest at all that COVID's been a blessing, but it's been kind of those two different angles it's been for me. I'm hoping that our field of international education, especially the sort of flavor that I'm interested in, is a little bit small in Canada. I'm hoping that because our program's new and we're going to start pumping out these fabulous graduates, that we will grow and that we will have a lot more connections within Canada, within Ontario, but also globally. I feel like I'm an extrovert 25-year-old, like I said, who's kind of stuck. But I see it coming. I see it a lot. I think the kind of work that we do in education is always going to be collaborative.
I guess I would also just add that for the sake of members in the audience, that path is probably a little more common in education than it is in some other fields, to have been out in the world, out of the ivory tower, and working in the discipline before you end up in I mean, I recognize that in the Faculty of Education there are both people who are 25-year-old mind in a 25-year-old body and others, but it's not as uncommon as you might see in some other fields where it's just almost unheard of to be able to break into academia that far into a career. So I welcome. I don't know, I'm not sure how to say that. I'm glad to have you. Avis, maybe we talk a little bit about just what are you working on at the moment? Like what are your current research interests?
Well, that STEM project I did got me thinking a lot about the accessibility of STEM programs, and that's just a recent thing in the last month that I'm keeping my eyes and ears open, because I would like to connect and work further on that. And there is a lot of STEM research done, Canada-wide, globally. So I think that's an area of growth that I think will definitely come. The work I've done with the refugee organization, it's a little bit interesting. I've come to a realization that I may be sort of working myself out of that field. The situation specifically in Greece, because I've done some work on the ground with them in the past, and I serve as an advisor to their board. They really wanted to have a collaboration where I could help develop curriculum with them, and I was in line to apply for a PEG grant. And that kind of fell apart when we read the fine print that the PEGs don't really involve curriculum design. That's something that's an exclusion. So I went back to the organization, and we're looking at different things. They're really interested in improving their training and the work they do. They rely, like a lot of these very grassroots organizations that work with refugees in Greece, they rely heavily on volunteers. Volunteers are very inspired, but they're not always experienced or qualified. It's starting to sort of leak into the idea of voluntourism, and which is also a very interesting area of research. I think that increasingly I'm realizing with the work I've done in Greece that we are looking at something a little different, that Greece is no longer a pit stop to more what a lot of refugees consider hospitable countries in the west of Europe, Greece is now becoming where they're kind of stuck, and stuck really is the word. So it's a bit of a pivot in terms of what's being offered in terms of education and social programs for these groups. The pandemic almost brought this into, improved the focus almost. It seemed to really point to the reality that being able to get out of Greece and carry on their journey is less likely. So it really is changing. I wouldn't call it necessarily an industry, but it's changing how these NGOs approach their work. So that's kind of I'm exploring that. I'm not sure how I feel about it, especially again, because of pandemic conditions, I can't go. I know that they need support and they want support, but I wouldn't feel my integrity as a researcher. I wouldn't feel good about it if I was doing it always remotely. I'd want to be on the ground. So that's an area I'm again tossing around. And then with our program, this International Education Studies program, you know, every day it's exciting. We're just talking today about setting up some student placements with schools, Ontario curriculum schools, interestingly, in Trinidad and Tobago and St. Martin. And just looking at how we train our teachers for these really interesting experiences outside of their comfort zone, experiences with otherness. So again, I'm looking at conceptual frameworks that we could use in our program to really help the students recognize the role of interculturalism in their work, but more pragmatically, how they're going to use that when they go on these experiences. All our students will be going on a 6 to 12 week placement, hopefully out of the country next May, June, July. We do have a lot of online versions ready just in case, but just that idea of how this experience is going to, how we can best prepare them for the experience and also those experiences afterwards. Most of the students want to be teachers in our program, and I think all of them want to leave Canada at some point. So I think how we do this now, we can really, it's a bit of a microcosm that we can explore in terms of the bigger picture, how we can prepare them.
Why do those other countries use Ontario's curriculum?
I don't know. I had a funny, I was at I'm name dropping again. I was at a Canadian embassy event this week. I've been living outside of Canada for 25 more than that years, and I've been invited to a Canadian embassy event once, and that was this week. So at the event, I met a teacher who is working at an Ontario curriculum school here in Prague, which I had no idea. I worked at the international school here, which is an IB, International Baccalaureate. So chatting with them, they put me onto this list, and there's a long list of schools. A lot of them are in China, but there were a couple. Trinidad and St. Martin works for us because it's the time zone. It's a little bit easier. So I don't actually know. I only learned about them 2 days ago, and I will be definitely asking questions when we meet with these principals next week.
Right. Well, that's very interesting. Also, voluntourism is a great expression. I never heard that before. I got to figure out how to drop it into conversation.
It's troubling. I think it's not, from my experience, it's troubling. I spoke to a guy at UNICEF. I keep dropping all these little things. I'm not trying to be that kind of person, but there's a guy I spoke to. He's wonderful. He's the head of the mission for education in Greece. And he's been there, for him, this is a lifetime. He's been with them for 5 years, which is an eternity. He came right at the beginning of the refugee crisis. And he really is torn because we want these voluntourists to come because it sheds light, brings money. Politicians want to come then and take pictures. It can help. But in reality, they don't always come with the skills that are needed. And in a place like Greece, there's lots of Greek people that can do equivalent work. So it's a troubling concept. It's not something, I haven't done I've done reading, but I haven't done any research on it, but I'm wondering if that's where I might be going next.
And let me ask you one more research related question. We'll move on to some others if we have time. I think of, maybe I'm wrong, but I tend to think of a lot of the kind of research that happens in the Faculty of Education as being what you might brand as sort of like action research. It's research that's aimed at either solving a problem that is occurring in schools, or it's aimed at informing curriculum or policy, I suppose. And it's so. Well, I mean, say there's that kind of research, and that certainly happens. There's also the kind of research that's more, you might think of it as more theoretical and less action oriented. It's more thinking about how do K through 12 students learn, and all the spin-off questions that one could have from that. And where would you situate your research interest? Is it more on the sort of action side, or is it? Maybe I'm labeling these wrong, like you wouldn't call them those things, but I think you understand what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I get the differentiation. I think teachers are pragmatic people, and I think I spent a lot of years in the classroom and a lot of days and hours sitting with kids doing what teachers do. And so I tend to lean towards any kind of initiative or research or project that's really going to make the education experience of kids better, more accessible, more interesting, whatever it is. So I like that. I think there is a place for those theoretical aspects, but I wonder if in a professional school like a teacher's college or a dental college or a medical college, how that knowledge might be used. And I feel like every scholar, I'm sure, struggles with the theory practice divide. I'm wondering if as a professional school we tend to be more action oriented, or whatever we're going to call it, because that's our business. That's where we are.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not trying to diminish the theoretical work that many faculties, at Laurier and beyond, are really pushing forward in how we think. But I'm wondering if it's the nature of our business, it's the nature of our school, that what we do is we train teachers, we train educators. And I can see why that is more active.
Hmm. Well, thanks for that explanation. That's helpful. Unfortunately, Avis, I think we've come to the end of our time for today. I'd like, I wish there was a way for you to hear the applause from the audience, but I'm sure they join me in thanking you for sharing your passions with us today. It's been very enjoyable.